One thing that you asked was about the HPUMC experience for me. It's no secret that there aren't very many people of color in the church. And I first started coming to the church when I was a student at SMU. I used to like hop out of bed and just put on some clothes and run over. And I remember at first being very daunted by coming to the church. It was very weird from the church that I grew up in. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, so like the fact that the service was timed, the music selections was very, very weird. But I remember the first time I came, I went back to my room and my Muslim roommate was like, "Courtney, I think you need to get that church to try again." So I started coming more regularly. But I would notice sometimes at the end of Cornerstone, we used to all hold hands and sing a hymn together. People would give me weird looks as if like they didn't want to hold my hand, or before the renovation to the way that the worship seating was set up, it would be like, should I sit next to these people? Should I not sit next to these people? I wasn't getting very warm and fuzzy feelings all of the time. But at the same token, there were so many people that were eager for me to be there. They were very loving on me. So it's kind of like the good outweighed the bad. And from there, I just started getting like super involved and kind of taking ownership. Like, this is going to be my church. And people need to know that I'm a member of this church. And people that come through the doors and have any apprehension about doing so need to realize that they are welcome here. So a lot of people, some people ask, like, do you work for the church? Because I volunteer so much.
You do, which is great. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. But I think part of the reason why I volunteer is because I know that there are more people like me that are probably wandering the halls, wondering, do I belong here? Do I fit in? Is it okay for me to come here and to continue coming here? And I want those people to know that they are welcome. And I want people that don't realize that we have diversity within the church to see me and know that I too am a member of Highland Park United Methodist Church. And next time that they see someone that doesn't fit the mold, their first instinct isn't that they don't belong to the church, but instead that, okay, maybe they are a member of the church, and go from that vantage point into whatever interactions they have with that person.
I know we talked about one of the things I'm really nervous to talk about, but I think it's really important, is the whole Black Lives Matter as a movement, kind of what it means to both of us. Because I know I reached out to you whenever the George Floyd thing happened, and just I told you, I said I just wanted to go hug all of my Black friends, and unfortunately I don't have that many. I wish I had a long list, but it's not that long. But I did. I text you, I text Carla, I text a few other friends, and I was just like, this is hurting me. I can't only imagine what you're feeling. So anyway, talk to me about Black Lives Matter and why that's important and what that means.
Yeah. So there's often this like almost black and white debate between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. And right. People oftentimes don't understand why others feel like saying All Lives Matter is minimizing Black Lives Matter. So I'll try to explain it from my perspective. I'm no expert in these things. I just have a lot of thoughts. And I think about these things a lot because it impacts me and it impacts people who look like me. So the easiest way that I found to describe Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter is Black lives are kind of the least common denominator in the equation. If we looked at the different ethnic groups across America, and this is not to say that any other ethnic group doesn't have their own bout of problems, but if you look historically across American history, you see that Black lives have not mattered, right? We start with slavery. Then we go into the Ku Klux Klan era, Jim Crow, civil rights movement. And you look now and we're essentially living under a social contract where with every interaction, people are telling us what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. You look at the case of Christian Cooper, bird watching in New York City. Apparently it's not okay for a Black person to bird watch to bird watch in New York City and ask someone to put their dog on a leash. Why? Because someone calls the cops on them, and luckily nothing happened. No one got hurt in that incident. But we know from past recent events that people call the cops on people of color, primarily Black people of color, And usually when the cops come, it doesn't matter the circumstance, the black person is automatically deemed the perpetrator. And because of that instance, because of what happened with George Floyd, what happened with the laundry list of black men and women whose names we know that we should not know, because of systemic racism, we know that black lives don't matter. Another way to think of it is the inverse. If all lives mattered, if we really truly held on to that and believed that and tried to implement that and enforce that in our society, then would we have all of the cases of all of the previous things I just named taking place? So Black Lives Matter is a call to bring attention to the fact that black people in America and people of color, they're separate but equal in a sense that once black people get to a certain level, historically, other races or other whatever other, I guess, characteristic falls underneath that umbrella usually starts being treated better. So Black Lives Matter is a call to the awareness and attention that these things are happening to people of color, and that we're kind of tired of having to deal with it. We just want to live our lives like everyone else lives their lives and not be.
And I think a lot of white people, I know for me personally, sometimes when I see the label black blank, as a white person, I think, well, a white person would never do that. I mean, that's like, you may as well call yourself the KKK and be like, that's it's really bad. So no one would ever put that label. And so I think learning what why saying Black Lives Matter, or why using the adjective black to describe something, why, I think white people think, if I support Black Lives Matter, does that mean I'm saying Black Lives Matter more, or, white lives don't matter, but this is not the struggle we're in right now. It's for our black neighbors, and, this is who we need to join hands with and help. And, like you said, if they were equal, it would just say humans, humans matter. Yeah. I'm hoping we get there someday. I'm hoping that these kind of conversations get us to, we're all humans, we all count, but that isn't the case, and so that's why I'm passionate about it. And I feel like white people need to stop worrying about the word black, because, but you tell me what that means to you. I mean,
Yeah, so, we kind of go through this every year with Black History Month as well, or Hispanic Heritage Month, why do we need to have a month to celebrate Black history? There probably wouldn't be a need for a month to celebrate Black history if Black history was properly taught in schools,
right,
if
exactly.
Black figures were elevated and lifted up in the same way that white figures are. So it really just hits at the point of racism, right? It's one race having power and control over another race simply because of another person's race, right? If we were living in a society where you were American, period, American of whatever descent, and instead of it being the way it is, where you're Black American or African American, Asian American, whatever it may be, we could get to that point, then there would be less of a need for these things. But right. It's funny because people think that after the Civil Rights Movement, the way that I've described it is just because there's not colored and white signs over a drinking fountain, people think that all of a sudden we have access to the same drinking fountain. And reality is that that's just not the case. Black families growing up, Black kids growing up just don't have the same opportunities, don't start on the same playing field, regardless of socioeconomic status as a white person. And that's what we're really getting at the heart of. It's the depth and the breadth of the ways in which society has created these systems, in particular in terms of systemic racism, and how that bleeds into the everyday life of Black people. I think we're just now, since the killing of George Floyd, people are finally starting to get it.
Well, tell me about systemic racism. Explain what that means, and I just can't believe we live in a time where this is still going on. But because I don't experience it, I therefore don't realize it's going on. So explain that. I want to hear what you think.
Yeah. So systemic racism is essentially going back to what I said before. Like, there was slavery, and then we have KKK era, Jim Crow, civil rights, and now we're in a social contract. And really, what happened over the course of time is that things that were legal became illegal on the books, but other things were put in their place to replace it. So even though it's, let's look at voting rights. Even though Black people have the right to vote, voting rights are stripped away in different cases, either from purging the voting rosters, through gerrymandering, through, if people have a conviction or a felony, having their voting rights stripped. There are ways that people have figured out, okay, if I do these things, then even though I'm not breaking the law anymore, I'm still getting the same effect. So it's really cause and effect. Just to paint a picture of using education as an example, a lot of schools get their funding from the districts that they're located within. Where does that money come from? A lot of it comes from property taxes, or some portion of it comes from property taxes. For the same reason that people pay to have a house or an address or residence within Highland Park so that they can send their kids to Highland Park schools. So if I'm a student and I'm in a school that is in a neighborhood that does not have a lot of financial backing, what does that mean for my education? Well, for a lot of students, it means that I don't have school supplies. I don't have textbooks. My textbooks are outdated. I don't have access to extracurricular activities. I don't have access to computers or any type of technology, which we know in today's society, you need to know how to use computer skills and things of that nature to get ahead. What does it mean when I graduate? It means that I could be a straight A student at my high school, but if I go to a school like SMU, I might just be at a B average, right, because my high school did not have the resources to adequately prepare me because of all of the things that we just named. So that's one aspect, right? So the system, it's not just one thing. And I think that we often look at it as one thing. We look at education. We look at poverty, for instance. If I have a certain degree, there's a certain dollar amount that's associated with the wealth that I could potentially obtain with that degree, right? Let's just blanket statement. If I don't graduate from high school, or if I graduate from high school, I'm not allowed to get, or not able to get into a good college, what does my perspective look like on life as opposed to a student that was? Even if I do go to a school like SMU, if I can't achieve the same things that other students can achieve, what does that look like for me as opposed to other students?
How do we attack that without just, I feel like so many people just want to throw money at the problem, mm-hmm, and they don't want to get into, the harder parts, how do we actually, because I don't think giving a bunch of kids Chromebooks or something, in a lower level school, it's not gonna, how do we make this work, Yeah,
and that's part of it, right? Like, we look at things as a singular issue. We look at housing, we look at poverty, we look at the judicial system, and we try to attack it as a singular issue. But one thing that's been coming to mind just talking about these events is that it takes a system to dismantle and break down an existing system. You can't do it just with pinpointing certain things and attacking just those things. Attacking those things is good, but you need to work as a collective unit to try to attack the system as a whole. So what does that look like? That looks like, one, helping out the schools. It looks like in areas where there are these food deserts, where there's not a grocery store for miles, or people can only use public transportation if they want to go and get groceries. It's putting neighborhood grocery stores in that neighborhood, or it's planting gardens in that neighborhood so that those residents have access to fruits and vegetables. If we look at the criminal justice system, it's really looking at it and saying, okay, no, this is not probably going to impact my life if I don't commit a crime, but does it make sense that people of color have higher rates of incarceration, have higher rates of sentencing than other races? Okay, what can I do to change that? Voting, right? A lot of these things are put in place by elected officials. So a lot of people focus a lot of their attention on presidential elections or on state elections and kind of ignore the local elections. But your local elections decide a lot of things: where the hospital is going to be placed, the funding for the schools, different things that directly implement and directly impact the community that you live in your day in and day out life. And we kind of just have to decide as a society, what are we going to allow and what are we not going to allow? Are we okay with the status quo? Because that's kind of the starting point. For some people, we could have this conversation and they're just like, you know what, that doesn't impact my life, so I don't really care. But the way that I look at it is, if we make each individual better as a country, we're going to be better, right? If I'm allowed to achieve greater and use my resources and use my talents to the highest potential possible, then isn't that better for America as a country? Isn't that better for the state of Texas, the city of Dallas, right? Highland Park United Methodist Church. Right. So we really need to start looking at this as a systemic issue and fix it as or coming from a systemic standpoint. And that's not to say that one entity, right? Highland Park United Methodist Church is not going to do it on its own, but collectively through saying, okay, Highland Park, you're going to focus on this area, and this certain entity is going to focus on this other area, with the collective goal that we're going to use our mission, our actions to try to change the system and stop just pinpointing certain things and fixing that one problem.
Well, tell me, as your friend and, you know, any good friend of yours that you would say, like, what is a good place for us to start? Like, how can we show support in these things and make some of these changes? We know voting for sure, but what else just on a day-to-day, I mean, what do you need?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things you can do. One is a lot of these issues, you know, people don't want to really talk about racism. We're kind of forced to talk about it now because of everything that's happened over the course of the past couple of months. And even pre-George Floyd, right? The news reports when coronavirus first started was people of color are being impacted. You know, the number of hospitalizations, the death rate was higher for African Americans and people of the Hispanic community than it was for other races. So one, it takes a lot of internal self-reflection in deciding, like, where am I going to be on this matter, right? I like to view my life choices through the lens of a Christian faith and a Christian background. So racism shouldn't be any different, right? So people need to get over that divide, right? That racism is a problem just like every other problem. And one, admitting that it's a problem is an issue for some people. But once you realize that, okay, this is a thing that I want to change or I want to be a part of the solution of, then you can go into the realm of having conversations like the one that we're having right now, the ones that we've had previously, finding out what is it really like to be a Black person in America. Because outside of me telling you these things, or outside of you asking me directly, I'm probably not going to go up to my white friends and just tell them, hey, last week this happened to me, because of the way that people have been treated in the past when they've done things like that. Or because of the fact that, you know, I just don't want to think about certain things. Like, I put it in a box and I close that box and I just want to be done with it. And when I come to church, sometimes I don't want to have to think about those things anymore. The way that I would look at it is the way that you would look at everything else. So you're planning a vacation to Paris, you research flights, and you research hotels, and you research attractions. Why not take that same mindset and apply it to racism, or apply it to a gym that you're trying to check out? It's no different. There's a ton of research on a lot of systemic racism issues. You can Google hashtags like #Black at SMU and find out about these experiences of people of color. You can watch movies that are particularly focused on either historical accounts or on different accounts of people of color. You can read books about it.
Give some good examples of systemic racism, like in particular, because I know you and I talked about this, and some of it just blows me away. I mean, it just blows me away that it's still happening, you know?
Yeah. So if we look at Hollywood, right, the fact that the number of Black actors and actresses that have leading roles in productions as opposed to their white counterparts, that's kind of the way that I like to think of it. It's like the tree. Systemic racism is kind of like these leaves that have been developed as a result of all of this, all of the history of everything that's happened in the past. So sometimes it doesn't come across as something that's immediately identifiable like that, right? When you see a commercial on TV, you don't think, well, I wonder how many people that they interview or audition for that role. You just automatically assume that this is the way things need to be. And it's asking yourself the question, is this a part of something greater, right? Another example is in employment. If a person has an ethnic, quote unquote, ethnic name, the chances of them getting hired is substantially lower. My name is Courtney Kelly. If my name was not Courtney Kelly, would I be sitting in front of you right now with all of the accolades that come behind my name? I don't know. my parents decided to name me Courtney. It was either Courtney or Brittany, so the world may never know. But
Yeah.
but there's, again, documented evidence, research that's been done that shows that these things exist.
Wait, so was there ever a time when maybe you went to go interview for something and they had no idea and acted surprised when you walked in?
So things are a little bit different now because of social media with LinkedIn and things of that nature, where people intentionally look you up to see what you look like before they see you. But yeah, it's happened in the past. Like, as you mentioned, I work in construction. And I would talk to a lot of these suppliers and distributors on a regular basis, and then every once in a while they say, well, let me stop by, I'm in the area. And I remember one time a guy walked in a door and he asked the receptionist, hey, I'm here to see Courtney. And the receptionist's desk was like 10 feet away from me. And she said, oh, she's right there. And he just kind of looked past me like, where's Courtney? I was like, I'm Courtney.
The one
like,
in charge,
hello.
right there.
Yeah.
Really cute one that, is not what you expected. That's so funny.
Yeah. So even that, right? Like, we've been conditioned to think that if a person has a certain name, then they look a certain way, or that they don't look a certain way, right? We've been conditioned to think that because I'm Black, that when I open up my mouth to speak, I'm going to talk a certain way, right? That's, people told me throughout my life, oh, well, you don't talk like a black person, or even Black people, why do you talk like a white girl? It's like, you mean, why did I speak proper English? Like, okay, got it. Or people ask me, like, why are you so different than other Black people? The reality is that there are lots of Black people like me. Like, we're not a monolith, right? But if all you know of Black people and of Black culture is what you see on TV, and whatever you're watching is not an accurate portrayal, or it's just a very, 1 in 1,000th example of what it means to be Black in America, or what it means to be Black in general, then that's kind of what your mindset is framed behind. So a lot of what we're talking about is really just taking the blinders off and shaking this preconceived notion of what it means to be Black. I went on a business trip with a coworker of mine. He's a tall, lanky white guy with blonde hair and blue eyes from East Texas, and that's how he describes himself, Yeah. So we were going on a business trip from Dallas to Houston, and we were riding together in his truck, and he needed to get gas. So we just pulled over at whatever gas station, and he said, hey, I'm going to go inside. Can you wash the pump? So I got out of the truck and I washed the pump for him. And he came back and he was like, look, we need to get out of here. These people are not used to seeing interracial couples. We need to leave. And this was like 2017.
Wow.
So if I told you that it was a scene out of the movie The Green Book, know, that makes more sense, right? But like, people just don't realize that these things happen still. Yeah. And in the same token, at that trip, we were confused as a couple of times later when we went to Houston and on our way back. But I don't even know what happened inside of the gas station. But he had enough wherewithal to know that something wasn't right, and he needed to get us out of that situation because of something. And it's like
this should not be happening now. These things absolutely should not be happening now.
Yeah, and I'm realizing too, I need to start telling these stories more, right? Like, I talk about these things with my parents, with my siblings, with family and friends. I need to start saying, like, hey, like, this just happened. I need to start raising more attention to the names that are not in the media when there's an instance of Black people, people of color, or anybody in general being killed or being hurt because of senseless acts. Because for every name there is, right, that we know about, how many more names do we not know about? How many more cases of similar restraints being applied to people and their subsequent death were revealed after George Floyd? And these were events that happened directly before he was killed and directly after. Or some that happened years ago that have been covered up. The Ahmaud Arbery case. Had the video not been released.
So I'm a runner, and I saw all my friends that, do on his birthday, do the tribute run, and we're doing all these really posts. And, I was like, who is this guy? And I started looking for the story because I hadn't heard the story. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I would have wanted to run for, but I wasn't going to make some, I wasn't going to go do something if I didn't really know what it meant, what it was. I wanted to go see it. But trying to find the story, mm-hmm. and I was like, this is his birthday today. I should be able to find it really easily. And I really had to dig. And mm-hmm. I almost, I thought about that. I thought, well, I would have liked to have run for him as a tribute, but I didn't know about it. So like, I shouldn't have to, you shouldn't have to go dig for those things. You think with the internet and, you'd think it'd be really easy to find. Anyway, that just kind of blew me away too, thinking, why can't I find his story? And it's obviously affected tons of people. And you should know these histories. You should know these stories. You should know the names and, not have to hunt and work so hard to get the story.
But that's the reality, right? If you want to stay abreast of what's going on, if you want to stay aware, if you want to stay plugged in, there's going to be a time. I know right now there's a lot of attention to things, partially because we're in the season of coronavirus.
Right.
So a lot of people are just glued to the news, and as things pop up, they have no choice but to listen. And that's part of the reason why I think there was so much reaction to George Floyd's death, is because everyone was kind of just glued into the TV. You had no distractions at that point in time. There's going to come a time when the world is distracted again, right? So you kind of have to think, how am I going to stay plugged in? How am I going to stay attached to someone or something that's going to keep me in the loop of what's going on? And for a lot of people, that person is me. Like, people are relying on me to tell them about the latest, whatever it is that happened, the latest development, I should say. But there are ways for you to do that for your own, right? You can sign up for organizations like Color of Change, and it will push you information, and sometimes it gets overwhelming for me. I'm to the point now that I can't watch the videos. George Floyd's video I couldn't watch. I can't listen to the 911 calls. Ahmaud Arbery's video I did not watch. I would mute the TV and leave the room every time because it is really traumatizing to constantly see these things. But I have to constantly see these things. I have to stay aware of what's going on so that I know how to navigate these waters and not end up on the wrong side of things. And how do I know that? Because I know that when this person committed this act, this was the aftermath and this was the result. So how do I not end up dead? How do I not end up assaulted? How do I not end up battered? So I need to stay aware of what's happening in society. But you can do the same thing, right? The same websites that I frequent, the same things that I do. One of the things that when I see these articles, I click them a lot because we know that the ranking on websites is based off of how many clicks an article receives. So if I see an article about Breonna Taylor, I click the mess out of that thing and I refresh the page and I click again because, I mean, it's clickbaiting, right? But that's a way to raise awareness, right? Signing petitions. I know I've been sending you and you've been sending me links to petitions about a lot of these cases that had not been uncovered or for justice to be served in the cases that have been covered. So each person kind of has to decide for themselves, how involved do you want to be in this? How much do you care about it? But I keep going back to the notion, how much better would we be as a society, as Christians, right? As a nation, if racism wasn't a thing for people to have to worry about, right? Life is
we'd
hard
find
enough.
something else, but
well, we probably would.
It'll be something, but that would be great if this wasn't. I think my kids I look at them as just the next hope. My daughter said, I'm gonna probably cry when I say this, but she said, she's 9, and she said, I don't want to live in a world like this.
Yeah. Yeah. The reality is that racism is a social construct, right? We can do away with it if we decide as a society that we don't want to live like this. And I think a lot of it is steeped in fear of the other, right? If I don't know anyone that looks like you and you look, and all I know is what I've seen on TV, what I read in books or whatever it may be, I'm just putting all of that onto you without knowing anything about you. I always tell people, when I'm within these 4 walls, I feel very safe. But as soon as these 4 walls mean in this church, right? But I know as soon as I step out of this church and onto SMU's campus, into the city of Dallas on Mockingbird, I'm just another Black person. And that's kind of my reality. So I'm subject to whatever anyone thinks of me as a Black female walking through, living her everyday life. Can we get to a point where that is not so fearful? I think we can. I think that there are more people that want to see change than there are people that want to stand against it. But we have to keep our fingers on the pulse of this. It can't be something that, there's an incident and everybody protests and everybody says Black Lives Matter, and then as soon as that wave is over, things kind of go back to the status quo. It needs to be constant, steady pushes to really create a movement that's going to start shifting the system, right? And how does that play out in everyday lives? It's some of the things we've talked about. With Ahmaud Arbery, that wasn't quote unquote systemic racism, right? That was hatred for someone for whatever reason it may be. But we see the system coming into play when it came time to bring these guys in, right? It took 74 days. It took Georgia's Bureau of Investigations getting involved in order to bring these guys into custody, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it can be overwhelming. But, someone told me one day, I was like, oh, I'm going to change the world. And they're like, don't worry about that. The world's already doomed. I said, you know what? That's one way to think about it. But I like to think that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm an optimist. So
right.
I was like, I might not be able to change the whole world, right? But I can change my little part of it, right?
Exactly.
So what can you do within your sphere of influence? We mentioned employment earlier. Can you look at your company and can you say, hey, we want to hire people that might not fit the mold of the people that we usually hire, right? Can you see the benefit of diversity, right? And one way to approach it is you see commercials sometimes, and it's like clearly that is blatantly racist, right? Would that commercial have been allowed to air if you had someone in a room that could say, hey, look, I understand what you're trying to get across, but I think that that's going to come off as racist. So if I were you, I would pull that commercial and place it with another one. If you don't have those voices in a room, right? If you don't have people to bounce ideas off of that don't think the same way that you do, if you don't have people from different life experiences that can add to whatever you're trying to produce, then you're essentially at a deficit. But can you acknowledge that, right? Can you see it for that? One person asked me when I was telling them about my interactions with the church, it's like, how many times has someone who could be another Courtney Kelly, quote unquote, walked through these doors and walked out again?
Yeah.
And didn't stay, right? What would that look like if instead of there being one of me, at the church, at my job, at whatever other venues that I associate with, what if there were 100 of me? What would that look like? Are you holding yourself out from that? Are you blocking your blessing? As a friend used to say, are you blocking your blessing by not seeing the beauty and the positivity that comes with having people around? And that's not to say that our pews should be filled with people from all different races and replacing the people that are currently there. No, it's to say that the church is open and our doors are open and our arms are open and we're going to welcome everybody. And if you fit with what Highland Park represents, then you're accepted. And it's kind of weird. We try to put racism in this box or in this class of its own, and we talked about this. We're Highland Park United Methodist Church, right? How many other United Methodist Church are there within a 10-mile radius, right? Probably 10. I don't know, but probably 10. I just guessed at 10. So we know that there are different United Methodist churches. We know that there are different denominations or different degrees of conservativeness or less degrees of it within the United Methodist Church body, right? We know that there are Catholic churches, that there are Baptist churches. We know that there are different religions. So we can have all of this diversity from a religious standpoint. Why can't we see that there's beauty and diversity when it comes to racism or when it comes to different ethnic groups and try to get away from this mold that we tend to box ourselves into? It's just it's weird that we've kind of pigeoned racism into this thing. And in some ways I was thinking we almost give it more power and more strength than we should by trying to stay away from it, as opposed to trying to talk about it, to try to figure out what is it, how do I help in it, and where do I go from here? And what do I want my society to look like, and what do I want my kids, the world that my kids live in to look like? The other way I thought about attacking this problem is going back to our foundation, right? As Methodists, there's the Wesleyan quadrilateral or quadrangle that gives us, reason and experience and all of these things, tradition and scripture, right, as ways that we are supposed to live out our lives as Methodists, or at least understand our faith as Methodists. Racism is the same way, right? If we approach it from that perspective, right, experiences. I can have an experience talking to you about my personal experiences, or you can go out and see these things for yourself. The Dallas African American Museum, different cultural events that are happening around the city. There are ways to get around and experience other cultures where you don't have to be put inside of uncomfortable or unfamiliar territory. The other thing that I thought about is when we have someone join a church, we ask them to give their prayers, their gifts, their service, their witness, and things of that nature to the church. Why don't we apply that same principle to tackling these issues, right? You can pray about our country and about the racial issues that we're having, and about the future that you want to see. You can serve, right? The church has plenty of partners that are already doing a lot of this work in trying to combat racism through their own means. You can give your gifts, right? Whether that's reading to kids in the afternoons, or being a mentor to someone, or volunteering in a health clinic, because as we see from coronavirus, the Black population is not the most healthy population, which even that stems back to the way things have been over time. So there are ways that you can apply the same foundational principles that we already know, right, that we already trust in, that we already believe in, to tackling this issue. It doesn't have to be this thing that is such a stigma, and that is such a taboo topic to talk about and a taboo topic to address. We can change the narrative around how we talk about racism so that we can really get at combating racism.
I just think too, it's not going to fall in your lap. People think, oh, it'll go away, or they don't want to do anything. It's an action, I love Bob Goff. He wrote a book years ago, Love Does, and I still think about it. It's an action word. You have to go and do something about it. You have to make it happen. You can't just sit and, like you said, I do worry that later on that these things are not going to be as relevant, as people get back to their normal lives and, coronavirus goes away and hopefully sooner. My kids need to go to school. But, I worry that these things will not be as talked about. And I hope that people learn something from this time, and especially this, this doesn't have to be something that divides us,
Yeah, it really doesn't have to divide us. I think another just thing that's been revolving in my head from a Christian perspective is part of our duty as Christians is to bring about the kingdom of God here on earth, right? Racism doesn't fit in that equation at all, right? We know what we're supposed to do. Now we just have to do it, right? And it's something, like you just said, it's an action, right? When Jesus was here, he wasn't chilling on the side of a mountain his entire time, like, oh, well, I think they'll be able to handle it. No, he acted, right? He went out. He sought people. He flipped the tables. He broke the mold. He hung out with the people that were the least of these, right? And we're supposed to be doing the same, right? And so we need to do a better job just individually and as a community, and making sure that we don't let go of that connection, right? That we're not supposed to just come into a place of worship and be fed and then go out and we're good. No, we're supposed to come into a place of worship, be fed, we're good to go out and to go feed others. Yeah, like we're supposed to constantly be engaged in that. So to sit idly by, to say, well, I'm not racist and think that that's enough, this is where it's gotten us. People saying, well, I'm not racist and that's enough, right? You don't get the death of George Floyd if people aren't saying, I'm not racist, that's enough, right? I think we've kind of reached a point where, no, it's not enough to just not be racist. You need to be anti-racist. You need to be an upstander, not a bystander. You have to be actively engaged in these things. When someone says something, you need to muster up the courage to do something about it. You need to use your spheres of influence to enact change in whatever ways you can. And it's like I said before, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that can happen with one person, one individual company or organization. It's going to have to be a collective body that says, this is what the standard is. We're not going backwards. A lot of people thought that after the civil rights movement was over, like, everything's good, everything's cool. You know, we have a black president. Racism is no longer a thing.
Right.
For Barack Obama, it was still a thing, right? So how can we say that racism is somehow eradicated because he became president when he was the subject of racist attacks, right? On the flip side, Meghan Markle, right? And I know this is a controversial subject, but Meghan Markle, right? If we look at the way that the British press has treated her, it's case in point racism, right? You have one entity that you treat a certain way and another entity that you treat another way because of the race. So it's up to us. We know that we can do great things. We know that we can break down barriers. We know that we can, heck, we send a man to the moon. Like, why can't we tackle this issue?
Right.
We try to make it into something that's really complicated. And it is complex, but it's not complicated, right? It's not a hard conversation. It's a difficult conversation. It's a vulnerable conversation, right? I have to be willing to let you into my little black box of all of these bad, really negative experiences that I care not to go to unless I'm provoked or unless there's something else that triggers it without my desire to trigger it in order for me to have these conversations with you. I have to be okay with doing that. And you have to realize that maybe everybody isn't okay with doing that, right? I'm comfortable with talking to you, but you might go and talk to another black person and they could say the exact opposite of everything that I've said. They could not want to share those experiences. It's something that each person has to decide for themselves how much they're willing to lay bare. But I've realized in the last couple of weeks and having multiples of these conversations that if I'm not willing to do that, then you might not hear what you need to hear to realize that this is still an issue and this is still something that's going on. And like I said, the breadth and the depth of what's going on in the experiences of not just me, but of my dad, who's telling me the same stories that his dad told him, people at SMU that were pulled over by the cops and had guns drawn on them, followed home after they were told that they could go home. Instances that if you see these people in their everyday lives, you would never think that they're going through any of these things, because they've gotten so good at hiding all of these things and tucking them away in that box. But maybe if we, Black community, do a better job of saying, like, hey, yeah, this happened to me. Like, I just need you to sit down and listen. I need you to believe what I'm saying. I need you to not think through, as I'm telling you this, your counter argument as to what you're going to say happen instead. I need you to not ask me, well, what did you do to make them act that way? Like, just listen. Just listen. We can talk through all of those points later, but let's just sit and listen and hear me out and believe what I'm saying, and don't give the other person a benefit of the doubt before I finish the story. If we start doing those things, right, then maybe we'll start to move the needle.
I don't wake up in the morning and think, I'm white and what do I have to wear today so that it offsets my whiteness or something, like I don't ever think that way. I don't know that that's how you think either, but I do think you're you're aware. You have to be more aware, and I don't think that way, and that's just completely different, and I understand that not labeling things like, white HPUMC or black HPUMC, just, whatever that, it's because white is a given. White, it's already there because it's already been established. So you have to use that word black to distinguish this is our thing. Like, I don't know. Does that make sense that
Yeah.
But that's what it's made me realize is I take what I have for granted and I don't even realize it. I just, in my day-to-day, I don't even have to think about it. And that's, for you to have to think about it is completely different. That's completely different.
Yeah, and I think just to go back to your point about teaching your kids like to appreciate other cultures while not diminishing their own culture. Like I had this debate with someone the other day. I can be fully American and fully black, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing against that. I can, for your kids, they can be fully within their entire, heritage, culture, whatever it is, traditions that you want to teach them, but they can also be taught, you're important, but also these people are important. And they're important because we're going to respect who they are, and we're going to respect their traditions and their culture and their heritage. And this is the world that we want to live in, right? And our choir, right, is a good example of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're an assembly of people that have kind of become a family in a lot of senses. And we don't look the same at all.
We're very different.
We're very different.
Yeah.
We have different personalities,
ages.
different
Yeah.
ages. Yeah, I think I've always been the youngest person. And
Yes.
I started out early 20s, and now I'm kind of in my late 20s. But we're different ages, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different experiences in life. But we come together, and we're one big happy family, and everybody is appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And me appreciating myself doesn't diminish you from appreciating yourself, and vice versa, right? And me appreciating you doesn't diminish me from appreciating me. We're just all lifting everybody up. And that's, I think, what we're trying to get at and where we're trying to go.
This one's going to make me mad. I can already tell, but go ahead.
Yeah, it probably will,
Yeah.
right? And it should make you mad.
Yeah.
So White Women's Tears is this it's almost like pity. It's this idea that when something happens, like I'll go back to the bird watching incident, and this labeling of these incidents is like, oh, well, Karen has done this again, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea that white women are so aggrieved by things that happen, and it's like a momentary thing. Like, I'm going to show all of this emotion because of the incident, but I'm not going to do anything about the aftermath. Or I'm going to use my tears as a way to get whatever I want. In the case of these Karens, either realizing or not completely realizing what the result of that's going to be. And essentially, like, we need the white women tears to stop. Like, we don't really need your tears. We need you, like, voting in ways that enact change in our society. We need you taking on the mantle of using your sphere of influence to understand racism and to express that to other people around you, so that we can get past the point of your tears, right, and get to the point where, like, my kids can grow up in a society
Right.
that is okay for them.
So quit crying about it and do something. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have the gift of tears, but I have a passion for things, and so hopefully that's not. I can't say growing up that I did. You'd ask my little brother. I definitely used them, like with my parents. But this is a whole nother. You have to. You can't just cry about it. You have to do something about it. You have to demand justice, and you can't just put on this pity party. And I don't know. It's kind of gross, isn't it?
Yeah, because the reality is that, like, and this might sound blunt, but it's like, I don't have time for your tears, right? Like, my people are literally dying, either from coronavirus or being killed for senseless reasons, like, day in and day out, right? Like,
you can cry, but let's do it while we're working.
Yeah. Or, like,
Let's-
save your tears for yourself, right? Like, not your
Yeah.
tears crying about your daughter, right? But, like, save your tears of I don't know, you're almost like, it just kind of goes back to pity, or like this sense of, like, well, if I cry, everything is going to be okay. Like, no, like, we're past that point. Like, people are literally dying day in and day out. Like, we need to do something about this now. Like, your tears are not going to help.
It's not enough.
No.
Yeah.
Gotta move on from that.
Yeah.